So, Matt, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the makeup of your family?
Yeah, so about me and my family. I'm Matt, and I got married to my husband Sam in 2018. So we're approaching the 6 year mark now. And in 2020, September of 2020, we adopted two boys, two siblings who at the time were 2 and 3. And in fact, in just a few days' time, it'll be our 4 year anniversary of them moving in with us, which is very exciting.
Oh, lovely. And why did you think about adopting? Was family always something that you wanted for yourselves?
Yeah, so I guess our motivations for adoption, we always knew that we wanted to have a family. Once we'd done the marriage thing, it was the next kind of step on our ladder. We were both on the same page about that. Um, we considered some of the other options that are obviously available now. Uh, in all honesty, it just didn't feel right to us to kind of artificially bring a child into the world when we knew that there were so many out there that were already in the world who needed stable and loving homes. So it just kind of, there was almost like a moral pull for us. And that's not to say that there's anything against, surrogacy or any of the other options, but just personally for us, adoption felt like the right option.
Right, right.
So why did you decide then to go with Pact to adopt?
So we decided to, when we were looking at adoption agencies and adoption options, the reason why Pact came top of our list was at the start, there was a really warm feeling when we kind of engaged with Pact. And to be honest, we didn't get that from a couple of the sort of local authority routes that we inquired via. So that initial kind of welcoming feeling without there being any pressure to immediately sign up was quite a draw for us. Secondly, Pact have got a large number of LGBT plus adopters. I think it's a third maybe. So for us as a same-sex couple, that was a draw as well. Not that we wanted to be only exclusively surrounded by other LGBT people, but it just helps if you're not the only same-sex couple in a room when you're having a training group or a discussion. Then you've got someone else who kind of shares your unique, I guess, perspective on the process. Thirdly, the wide coverage area that the Pact have, obviously you're not restricted to just children under a local authority care. So it just felt like there was a wider pool to choose from. And I guess the fourth and final reason for us was when we did our research, the post-adoption support that Pact offered seemed really strong. And in fact, even kind of pre-adoption, lots of training materials and webinars available to kind of help us in our preparation and to help us come to a decision. So yeah, the whole package from Pact felt really welcoming, really supportive.
I guess carrying on from that, how did you find out about Pact in the first place?
So how did we find out about Pact? Good old Google. Our first port of call probably for anything that we want to know about is let's do a Google search. So when we kind of did a search for LGBT plus supportive adoption, Pact comes top of the list. So it just went from there, looking at the website. And then, as I said, inquiring, speaking to somebody, and yeah, it from there felt like the right choice for us.
I'm curious, Matt, this looks different for everybody, but I'm curious, how long was that timeline between starting to think about adoption and then actually starting the process? There's a lot of steps before that, isn't there? But I'm wondering how long that roughly took.
Yeah, so how long was the process for us? We first inquired probably February 2019. So that was an initial phone call with somebody from Pact. And then, as I said, the boys moved in with us in September 2020. So essentially an 18-month process, going from very first inquiry all the way through the training and the assessments, the various panels, and then the matching process and introductions, and then the boys moving in. It I mean, at the time, we look back at it sometimes and you think, wow, it's quite a long process. But having spoken to others, I think 18 months is certainly average, if not, quite quick for some people. Because I guess that matching element of the process, trying to find your forever family, takes different periods of time depending on the kind of children you're looking to adopt, and the availability of children, and I guess the needs of those children that you as an adoptee or an adopting couple are kind of able to support.
So you touched on the adoption process. There's lots of elements to that. So how did you and Sam find that? How was it for you?
How did we find the adoption process? 2 words: thorough and probing. There's lots of questions. There's lots of kind of sitting down with our social worker, where she came round to our house, interviewed us separately, interviewed us as a couple, obviously went off and spoke to some of our family and friends, the people we put down as references. Loads of kind of paperwork to fill in and questionnaires. But it's all, it's for a reason. It's got to be, you've got to find the right people to adopt. So we sometimes joke actually that it was a bit like free therapy sometimes, just sitting down and chatting to the social worker, because, it was everything right from how were we parented as children, our experiences of growing up, our memories of that time, all the way through to how we now feel that we would parent and how we're going to parent as a couple. So yeah, it's definitely thorough, and so you've got to be prepared for lots of questions, and to be really honest, because stuff will come out if you try to hide anything for any reason. But having said that, we felt incredibly well supported during that whole time. Pact, as I said, were really supportive throughout, and we had an amazing relationship with our social worker, and she was just fantastic. She was like, it really felt like we had an advocate in our corner the whole time, and I really think that was what made our whole process actually feel quite easy and quite smooth, because we knew that we had such an experienced professional in our corner, fighting for us and for the best things for us all the way through the process.
What do you think it was that your social worker was doing to build your trust in her and your relationship and that advocacy?
So I think it's that, it must be so difficult to essentially go into a stranger's house, and start asking them quite deep and detailed questions about how they were brought up and, experiences from their childhood. So I think the very fact that she was such a personable personality is what made that process feel quite natural almost. It almost felt like it was a friend coming round to chat to us. It was, it never felt like an assessment, as it were. It never felt like we were kind of being marked during those sessions. So however she did it, she made us feel incredibly well at ease during those sessions. And then as we kind of went through the process, the way that, again, our trust in her was reinforced was when, during kind of matching, we'd see profiles and we'd get them sent through to us by children's social workers, with, we think you'd be a really great match with our child. Our social worker would kind of have a look and say, well, yeah, but have you considered X, Y, and Z? Maybe this isn't quite right for you. She was definitely the one who was putting the brakes on sometimes of our enthusiasm just to, get on with the process and to bring a child into our family. That she almost had the sensible hat on sometimes to say, just take a second, think about the practicalities here. And looking back, that was really important because you obviously don't want to get this decision wrong. So having somebody who was so experienced and just felt like knew us so well to be able to intervene in those circumstances and say, just think twice, and kind of calm us down a little bit was so important. And yeah, she did an amazing job.
You mentioned it was a priority to find an LGBTQ plus supportive agency when you were looking. What was your experience as a same-sex couple going through the process?
So it was kind of really reassuring to us when we first went to our first training session, and basically half of that group were LGBT plus, where, we come from a relatively small town. In the school that the boys go to now, for example, I'm not aware of there being any other same-sex parents. So it was nice to be in a group where we weren't the odd ones out, if you like. And not that, if the group had been entirely composed of heterosexual couples or single adopters, it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. We would have still got a lot out of it. But just knowing that you're in that space where other people have had very similar life experiences to you, was so important to us. And it just, I guess, helped us relax into the process that little bit more to not feel like you were the different ones in a group every time.
You said you adopted two. Was that your initial picture for your family?
So in terms of the initial picture for our family, we always knew that eventually we wanted to be a family of four. Now, had you asked us in 2019, does that mean you'll adopt two straight away? We probably would have said no. We probably would have said we'll adopt one, and then when the time's right, a few years down the line, we'll adopt another. And I think the other thing that changed quite a lot, again, if you'd asked us in 2019, we'd have said we wanted to adopt a baby, as young as possible. Whereas as we kind of went through our training and we spoke to the social worker and we learned more about the needs of the children who are waiting for adoption, it felt to us like there was a lot of benefit to just going that little bit older. I mean, our two boys, as I said, were 2 and 3 when they moved in with us, because you at least have got a more of a picture, I guess, of their development markers that they might have hit or have missed at that point. You almost know a bit more what you're dealing with than with essentially a newborn or very close to baby. So yeah, our picture definitely changed. We realized we were up for that slightly older age group. We ended up being approved to adopt 2 children up to the age of 4. So that was perfect for us. We got to the point in the training where we realized actually we are ready to take 2 on at once. If we're going to do this process twice anyway, let's make it slightly harder for ourselves up front and adopt 2 at the same time.
And I guess you don't know any different because you went for it and did adopt 2, so you don't know what it was like to adopt 1 and then 1. But did it feel like it was a harder option?
So did it feel like a harder option to adopt 2 rather than 1? I think from what we've experienced, it certainly wasn't twice as hard. It wasn't, double the amount of work, double the amount of effort. I'd say maybe it was 1.5 times more difficult than adopting 1, purely just because of so many logistical factors. When there are 2, and this is the same for any family who's got more than 1 child. They've got to be in different preschools at different times and different pickups. All that kind of thing comes into effect. You've got 2 car seats in the back of the car, so realistically, you can't get an adult in the back when you've got both children in the car at the same time. So all those things change. But in terms of the amount of kind of emotional work that was needed, it certainly didn't feel like we'd taken on double the amount of work. And having seen, other families who've got 1 child, whether that's via adoption or via natural means, they sometimes have a different problem in that all of the child's attention is on the parents, whereas our two boys have at least got each other to share some of that attention between. So it's not solely down to Sam and I to be, entertaining one of them all the time. So yeah, I guess both ways have pros and cons, but we're definitely glad that we went the siblings route up front.
Yeah, so kind of carrying on about that bond between your boys, how would you describe it? And is it important to each other and to them that they've got each other?
Yeah, so is the bond between our boys important to each other? 100% yes. They fight and they bicker and they wind each other up like any, well, now 7 and 6-year-old would do. But at the end of the day, they've got a shared experience that no one else has experienced. Other children have experienced adoption, but they won't have come from the exact same circumstances that our two did. And it's an experience that we know the facts about, but we'll never know really how they experienced those early years. Whereas it is something that they share, and it's something that bonds them forever. So yeah, despite the times that they get on each other's nerves, they love each other very much, and I just couldn't envisage a world where they weren't adopted together as a pair.
That's really lovely. Do they share a lot of the same hobbies and things?
Yeah, so do our boys share lots of the same hobbies? They've got lots of things that they do in common, but we're also quite conscious because they're so close in age. There's only 13 months between them, that we don't only want them. We want them to have time where they've got their own friends. They're doing their own activities away from each other as well. So, for example, they were doing after-school football club once a week. Up until the start of this year, they were doing that together. Whereas now that the older one's gone up a year group, he does it on a different day. And that's really good for him because now he hasn't got his little brother around. And he gets to do stuff with his friends and feel that little more grown up, I guess, because he's doing it at a different time. Other things they share. They both really love the outdoors. They just love being out in the garden. Or going on a walk, going into some woodlands, But equally, they've got their own interests and hobbies as well. The older one is much more, I guess, kind of creative. He's will happily sit, by himself and use his imagination to play, make up scenarios. Whereas the younger one is a bit more physical in his in how he likes to spend his time. So he wants to be kicking a ball about. Or he wants one of us to be rolling around with him, and chasing him around the house. So yeah, they've got lots of stuff they do together, but I think it was really important for us and for them that they do have their own interests and they don't just always come as a pair, because that isn't really fair on them.
I've got a couple of questions around the process before asking about the parenting, but I wondered what you found the most challenging and what you found the most surprising about the process for yourselves. And then I also wanted to ask you about your experience of panel, because lots of people kind of worry about that part.
Yeah, so how did we experience the process? What were the hardest bits and the easiest bits? For us, there were a couple of kind of key moments in the adoption process that kind of really kind of struck a chord, I guess, and gave us pause for thought. One of those times was when we had to fill in the form, which essentially listed all the kind of different needs that a child is, possibly going to have, and you have to kind of indicate your comfort level with adopting a child that matches that profile. That was so difficult because the human in us just wants to say none of these things matter. We'll adopt regardless because we just want to offer a loving and stable home. But the practical, sensible part then has to kick in and say, yes, but there are some things that we aren't capable of dealing with. And that would have been outside of our realm of experience, and that wouldn't have provided a good outcome for an adopted child to come and live with us if they had that particular condition or diagnosis. So that was tough, because it felt quite mean, almost, if to use a really simple word, to have to essentially score what we felt we were able to deal with. But it was important to focus our minds on what we were able to accept and what we were comfortable with, and just, again, to give us pause for thought about the kind of needs of the children that are waiting for adoption, and to make sure that we were 100% sold, and ready to take on some of those challenges. What we also then did, that form you fill in twice, or you revisit your answers to that matching criteria form a little bit later in the process, once you've done some of the training. And I think what was evident to us is that some of our concerns over some of the things that were listed on that form had kind of been alleviated by what we'd learned in the training. So the revisit of that form, actually, we ticked more things that we were comfortable with by that point, because we'd learned more. We'd learned more about what some of those things were. I mean, some of them we had to do a Google search to find out what some of those conditions were that were listed, and they sound quite scary when you see them, the top result on a Google page. Whereas when it gets explained to you in the training, and people who've experienced these things talk, it puts you at ease a lot more. So while PACT and other agencies are not just going to assign you the next child in line, off the conveyor belt, it's not like that. They're going to take your considerations into consideration. That was a terrible way of saying that. While PACT aren't just going to give you the next child off the conveyor belt, they are going to work with your considerations. And I think the key message is just to be open to some of those different options. There may well be some things that you just know that are outside of your realm of experience. That's absolutely fine. But you can't also just go through that form and say, we don't want any of this, we want a perfect child, because in all honesty, that perfect child isn't going to exist. But there will be lots of amazing children that maybe don't quite meet one of those criteria that will be just the best fit for your family. So just bear that in mind.
Can we now just talk about if you've got any tips for anyone preparing to adopt and start the adoption process, Matt?
Yeah, so my top tips for anyone who's looking to adopt, definitely do some reading when you're considering. We read some great books while we were processing our decision. One that I really recommend is No Matter What by Sally Donovan, which is just such a honest account of the process that she went through. There are obviously some details now which is slightly different to how the process works, because that was written a while ago, but broadly the processes are the same, and the things that she experienced are going to be the same. So just to get yourself in that kind of mindset of what the adoption process is like, then reading it from an account of somebody who's done it is really good. I would say do some voluntary work. One of the things that you're going to be asked as you go through the process is, have you got experience working with children? Are you doing any voluntary work currently with children or young people? And really, you need that answer to be yes. Both myself and my husband have got quite a lot of experience of working with children. Him in a classroom setting, and me just in kind of running youth clubs and doing mentoring work and all those kind of things. But both of us had experience of slightly older children, realistically from kind of 8 up through the teenage years. We didn't have a whole lot of experience other than nephews and friends, babies and children of that younger age group. So we went to a local school, and we just kind of went in for one afternoon a week, and we got involved with their playtime, basically their free playtime with the 4s and the 5-year-olds outside in the mud kitchen, and throwing a ball around and chasing around the woods and stuff. It was so much fun, and it just gave us that experience of interacting with children of that age group. And I think what I'd also say is, again, even if you've got loads of voluntary experience, you're coming at it from a different viewpoint when you're doing it because you're thinking about adoption. So all the way through the voluntary work we were doing in response to this process, we were kind of asking ourselves the question, what would we do if we were parenting in this situation, which I had never asked myself before. When I'm working with teenagers in a youth club, I was never thinking I was potentially their parent. I was just a reasonably responsible adult at the time. Whereas, it gave us a chance to consider how we would do things. So just viewing it through that lens of adoption is really important, and will benefit you no end when it comes to the panels and chatting with your social worker, and just, I think, showing that you're willing to put time and effort into the process, because at the end of the day, it's quite a small ask for what is going to be a huge responsibility of placing a child or children for adoption with you.
Can I just really quickly, you were talking about childcare experience. So I just wondered, at the early point, what did you and your partner see as your strengths as parents, and how has that developed?
What did we see as our strengths as parents? Well, we are both quite calm and patient people. We don't tend to get flustered or kind of wound up easily. And I think, having experienced other people's children of that kind of 2, 3, 4-year-old age group, in all honesty, they can be quite annoying at times, to put it bluntly. So to be able to let some of those challenges kind of roll off your back and not take stuff personally, I think was a good character trait that we both possessed. Also, I think we both had very similar upbringings in terms of, the values that our parents had given us and our families. We'd grown up in, very stable, relatively large families in terms of, aunts, uncles, and cousins and stuff. So we knew what it was like to be in a family with lots of people. So we felt like we could bring that kind of experience and also bring all of our family along with us to give the child or children that we were eventually going to adopt that whole experience of just being wrapped up by an awesome, supportive family. I think we're both really good listeners as well. So we kind of saw that as a strength when it comes to almost being able to read between the lines of what might be upsetting a child. That kind of empathy skill is something which we both possess to some extent. So yeah, again, we felt like all of that just meant that we had the right kind of toolkit, which was then bolstered by the support and the training we got from PACT to be able to take on this new challenge and hopefully succeed at it.
Amazing. So now moving on to kind of when you first saw your children for the first time, why them? What kind of stood out to you and your husband?
So what was it that first drew us to our children? We saw a photo of them and their profile, and there was something about that picture that drew us in. It's really hard to actually put a definitive "it was because of this" on it, but we just got that feeling. There was something about them in their picture. They were really smiley, but they also had that little glint in their eye that told you they were probably quite cheeky as well, and that just really appealed. The fact that they were smiling, given what they'd experienced in their young lives, was reassuring. And it was almost as if it was kind of meant to be with their profile, because we saw it and then it went away. So there's a system called LinkMaker where you can view all of the profiles of children that are available for adoption. their profile disappeared. So we thought, oh wow, they've been adopted, or they're going through the process. That's it. And then I don't know, a week later maybe the profile reappeared again. We saw that picture and we just knew that it was meant to be, fate, whatever. That was the they were the children that we should go for. So we registered our interest, and then obviously got more information from the social workers, found out more, and everything we found out just made us want to adopt them more and more. It just built from there.
So then when you went on to meet them, what was that like? Where was that?
So we actually did, because during our whole matching process and the introductions, we obviously had the complication of COVID lockdowns. So it was a slightly strange time. Anyway, what we did a sort of drive-by meet the very first time. So their foster carers took them to the local park near where they lived, and Sam and I then went and chatted to the foster carers as if we were friends of theirs, and just had 15 minutes essentially observing our boys playing together and seeing them kind of run up to the foster carers and ask questions or interact with them. So just that very really brief glimpse into their little personalities and how they were. And then not long after that, once they'd been told that we weren't actually friends of the foster carers, we were going to be adopting them, we met them for the first time essentially as their new daddies. And neither of us will ever forget us walking around the corner from the car park into this park, and they were sat on the bench with their two foster carers either side. And when they saw us, they ran up to us and shouted, "Daddy" and "Daddy." And it was just the most amazing experience. I didn't expect them really to call us that straight off the bat. But obviously the foster carers had said that it was fine to do that if they wanted to. And it was just the most surreal thing to be like, oh, yeah, we are actually dad and daddy now. That's weird. They were kind of going around the park when we were walking with them, kind of holding their hand. They were telling these random old ladies who were in the park with their grandchildren, "These are my new daddies." They were just so proud and excited. And yeah, as I said, that is a feeling that we will never forget.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So in terms of the your son's foster carers, do you still have a relationship with them?
Do we still have a relationship with our boys' foster carers? So the relationship with them kind of naturally tapered off. They were kind of keen for that to happen, not because they didn't want to continue a relationship with the boys, but because they felt like they were obviously there to do that job for that period of time, and they then didn't want to interfere with us taking over and building our family. So we had a few visits with them kind of immediately after the boys moved in, just for them again to kind of see them the last few times. And then after that, there were no more visits in person. We did a few follow-up phone calls just to let the foster carers know that the boys were doing well and everything was going great. And then we're at the point now where essentially we send them a picture once or twice a year just to show what the boys are looking like, how much they've grown, give them a really brief update about how things are going, and just check in with them really. It's kind of at the point now where I think that if the foster carer said to us, "Oh, pop in one day, come and visit," we would, because the boys are so secure in their attachments here that now it would be absolutely fine to go and visit them again. But yeah, I think the time for that has naturally passed. But those little updates just to keep them in touch, because I say this to anyone who kind of asks me about the boys. Their foster carers were the absolute heroes of their story, because they lived with them for 14 months after being removed from their birth family before they came to live with us. And what those foster carers did for them in that time was just, you can't really put it into words. They gave them all of that stability and love and care that has made our two boys such well-rounded children now. And yeah, we'll forever be grateful to them and all the foster carers like them who do such an amazing job.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So did you have contact with your children's birth family? And if so, could you describe that experience, please?
Did we have contact with the child's birth family? Yes, we did. We'd always said when Pat first kind of brought up the idea of contact with the birth parents or birth families during our training, Sam and I discussed it and we said, yeah, that is something that we would do. Despite us both feeling that it would be a pretty hard thing to do, it was something we felt like was important to us to have had that contact so that we had something to share with our boys later on in life. So yeah, in probably the week before the boys moved in with us, we had a session with their birth mum and with her mum, so the boys' maternal grandmother. And yeah, I guess we had maybe an hour and 20 minutes sat chatting. You know, I can't dress it up. It was a very difficult conversation to go into because how do you start that conversation? You know, they know that you're going to be taking their children, you know, their those boys away from them to live with you. But Sam and I had discussed it beforehand. We kind of said that we were just going to approach that meeting, essentially forget what we'd read in the reports and the paperwork about, you know, the boys' background and how they got to where they were, and just treat those two people on a purely human level for that, you know, hour and a half, whatever it was. Because at the end of the day, they were in pain. You know, it was difficult for them. There was lots of tears, and we just tried to steer that conversation towards fun things about the boys. You know, we asked them about what they were like as babies. Some of those mannerisms that the boys had, you know, we asked, has the younger one always done this? Has he always had that cheeky glint in his eye? You know, that kind of thing. So just some stuff to make them talk, I guess, about the happy memories that they had, and just really to reassure them that we were nice people, and that we almost said to them, we take ourselves outside of the whole social services, the legal process. That's nothing to do with us. Our job now is to look after the boys, give them a loving home, which is absolutely what we're going to do. You know, I think they went away from that meeting with that reassurance in their head. We took a photo. Again, it was lockdown time, so it was a socially distanced photo. So it's probably the most awkward photo you'll see in your life. But we've got that, and we've shown the boys that photo. And I think it was so important to have that meeting, because we otherwise wouldn't be able to share those memories with the boys. And I think we'd feel like we didn't do everything we could to kind of have that connection with their birth family.
Thank you for that, Matt. Really appreciate you talking so openly. Just very quickly, you were talking about the boys, talking about that photo and their birth family. Obviously, the boys are kids. They're busy being boys. But do they often ask about their history and their story?
So in the early days, they asked a lot more. There were, lots of questions up front about their history. Usually when we were kind of in the car, and we learned about this in the adoption training, that often those times when you're in the front, they're sat in the back, not making that direct eye contact. They'll often come out with the things that are really on their mind. And we definitely experienced that. They would ask, they would obviously ask why they were adopted, why they were different to some of their friends. One of the most heartbreaking things that they ever really asked was, were we adopted because our old mummy and daddy didn't love us anymore? And, that's a horrible thing to hear a child say, because of course that isn't the reason they're adopted. We always tell them their parents and their family love them very much, but they weren't able to do that job of keeping them safe, which is where we stepped in. So those kind of questions came up a lot. And then as time went on, the questions changed. They almost started to forget some details, and I think that kind of alarmed them a little bit. So they'd sometimes get upset. They'd say, I can't remember my old mummy's name, or I can't remember what my old daddy looked like, and it really tugs at the heartstrings when you hear that. So again, having some pictures to show is really useful in those circumstances, because we can say, oh, well, we've got your memory box. We can have a look when we get home and remind you, because the last thing we want them to do is to forget, because that's part of their history. It's not something to brush under the carpet and never speak about again. It's central to them. And while we don't get those pictures out every day to remind them, it's there whenever they want to look at them. So yeah, as I said, the questions have stopped. They come now more from their friends, probably. Lots of the boys' friends and their friends' parents will often ask questions about how the boys came to live with us, what their backstory is, whether they're full brothers or half brothers, and lots of parents, I find, they start asking, they'll tentatively ask the first question, and they'll say, oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you this. And we always say, just ask anything. It's not a secret. Ask the boys anything. They know full well what their history is. So don't ever be afraid. And please tell your child not to be afraid to ask our boys about adoption, and about the fact that they've got two dads. Obviously, they've got a double whammy of difference, because they're adopted and they've got same-sex parents. So yeah, always just keeping that conversation open, being prepared to answer any questions they have honestly, and yeah, being always willing to share and remind them of who they are.
I guess I'm just talking now. I guess it's a balance, isn't it, between being open and protecting their personal information, and some of that isn't for everybody to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually made the decision really early on that actually our families weren't going to get the detail of why our boys had come into the care system in the first place. Obviously, they're aware of the general reasons why these things happen. They can draw their own conclusions on that. But we never wanted to sit there and detail, X, Y, and Z happened, because we just felt like that wasn't something they needed to know. They didn't need to know that in order to love the boys. It makes no difference. So that, obviously that very personal stuff is between Sam and I. The boys, as they get older to an appropriate age, will find out some of that, and if they want to then share it, that's up to them. But yeah, it's definitely not something that everyone needs to know.
So going back, what was it like when the boys came back to yours to stay, to be your team and your family?
What was it like when the boys first moved in? It was quite a shock. To suddenly be in charge of two little people was quite a responsibility shift. That first night, we got them to bed. Sam and I sat downstairs and just thought, wow, essentially there are two strangers asleep upstairs that are now, our social service still have an involvement until the adoption order comes through. They are now our responsibility. That is quite an undertaking to suddenly have that realization. But coupled with that, and to counteract it, was just that immense feeling of excitement and, I guess, relief that the process was over, and that we were now at the start of the next phase of our journey and of their journey. And it was that excitement, I think, that won out. That, I guess, all new parents have a moment of doubt where they think, wow, what do we do now? But yeah, the positive aspects to being at the end of the process of adoption just far outweighed that, and the excitement took over. Now we just got stuck into routines and setting boundaries and all this kind of stuff in those early weeks. The lockdown helped because we had essentially 2 weeks where we were just in the house, a daily trip to the park, no contact from anyone else. We just built our family unit, really concentrated over that time. And then as time went on, we slowly introduced them to family members, and just those moments of joy where they meet them for the first time. Those are things that will stick in our memories forever. We've got great pictures of my parents giving them rugby tops and stuff. I'm from Wales, so, rugby's a big part of our story. And Sam's parents, bringing them a small gift to share and just playing with them. It's just, it's an experience that is like no other, really. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's great. How did the boys find moving in, like that change from moving from their foster carers into a house with you both?
How did the boys find moving in with us? For all intents and purposes, it went so smoothly. We essentially had, in the kind of introductions plan that had been drawn up between us and the social workers, we had a 4-week introduction period. But we actually pulled that end date forward a little bit because it had all gone so well. So obviously the boys were coming to our house more and more in the latter stages of that introduction process, spending more and more time here. They just felt so comfortable. And in fact, it was quite hard the times that then we were at the foster carer's house, we were doing bedtime, for example. They wouldn't want us to leave and they'd get really upset. So it was almost more damaging to prolong that process and not move them in that little bit sooner, because it was upsetting them more, to be honest. And then they just took to it so easily. They really enjoyed being here. We just tried to have so much fun, to be honest, in those first couple of weeks that they hardly had time to really think too much, I think, about what was going on. I mean, obviously they're processing it underneath, but there was never that outward sign that they were kind of upset or missing being with the foster carers. They obviously asked about them lots, and we used to get quite a lot, silly things. We'd make a sandwich and, cut it in a certain way, and they'd say, "Oh, our foster carers would have cut it this way." Everything was compared in those early days to how the foster carers did stuff. But that gradually faded, and they've done so well to adjust as they have.
PACT has a wide range of adoption support, all different levels and at different points. What have you accessed at different points, and how have you found accessing the support?
Yeah, so we've never had a kind of direct call to ask for specific help from PACT. But what we have done is use things like the webinars that PACT has got available on various topics. We watched one on kind of getting into a sleeping routine. We watched one on how to kind of handle fussy eating, or just kind of changes in eating habits and things to be conscious of. And just other resources around therapeutic parenting, how to be playful and curious and all that stuff. Having that on tap essentially to access was so important to us. And it was a factor in deciding on PACT, the fact that they said up front, we've got all this post-adoption support available. And because obviously at that stage, we didn't know what elements of that support we might need to call on. And then other things that we've engaged with are like some of the family days that PACT set up. So once a year we get together in soft play or a local theme park with a load of other PACT families and staff, and our boys just get to have fun with other children who've been adopted. We get to chat to the other parents and, compare notes, compare stories, and just decompress, I guess, a bit with people who've all been through very similar experiences. So PACT kind of gives you that instant community, I guess, of people. And we're really good friends with one of the other couples who were on our adoption training, who adopted two boys of more or less the same age, at more or less the same time as us. So it was so good to have them kind of alongside us on the journey, which, you know, we wouldn't have met them if it wasn't for Pact. And I know other people who've used some of the other more specific therapeutic services that Pact offer and have had, you know, nothing but praise for those. So again, it's reassuring that if anything comes up in the boys' future, that we can call on those resources.
Great. Brilliant. What have been your biggest challenges of your experience of being a parent so far?
The biggest challenges of our parenting experience so far, I think one of the key things has been kind of setting boundaries and seeing what other parents do things that might be different to you. So this is a really silly example, but if we're in the park, you know, we tend not to let our boys run up slides just because I've seen so many kids fall flat on their face and like damage themselves going up a slide. So we always say, don't run up the slides. And then sometimes we'll be out with, you know, other parents and their children, and they're letting them do whatever, you know, they're running up the slides. And we always feel, are we being harsh in saying no to this? Should we just let them do it and find out for themselves if they land on their chin, you know? But yeah, I guess we stick to our guns in those circumstances. So yeah, navigating that. How do you parent your child when other parents are around who've got maybe slightly different levels of tolerance and standards for certain behaviours? That's been an interesting one to navigate. In the very early days of them moving in with us, that initial kind of favoritism towards one parent or the other was definitely evident, and it actually swapped as well. So our youngest was really drawn to Sam at the very start. You know, he wouldn't, if we were out walking or wanted to cross the road and I said, "Oh, hold my hand," he would then go and hold Sam's hand. You know, he would never hold my hand. And then for no reason, you know, it's not as if we did anything specific, it swapped to me for a bit. And it would be always me that he'd come to and, you know, want to hold my hand across the road. And then again, some more time passed and it just faded out completely. So now, you know, we're equally as open to being the parent of choice for any given activity. So, and I think that is something that is pretty common with children who are adopted. They may well kind of show a level of favoritism towards one parent for a period. I think the most important thing there is just not to take it personally. At the end of the day, and you know, I'm not a psychologist, but I guess in that period, they feel safest with that one person slightly more than the other. And at the end of the day, your whole job as an adopter is making those children feel safe. So however that occurs, even if it's ignoring you briefly and going towards, you know, the other person, then you're still doing good work by getting to that point. That said, obviously it can be hard. As I said, we're pretty resilient people. We didn't take it to heart. I'm sure that some people would find that quite tricky, but yeah, that child's not doing it on purpose or not to be spiteful. There's obviously a reason why they're doing that, and just push through it and it'll balance itself out.
And then on the other side, what have been some of the, I'm sure, many highlights as a parent?
Yeah, so what have been the highlights of parenting so far? There are so many. I think sometimes people who haven't gone through the adoption process feel like you're missing out on a load of firsts by adopting a child. So yeah, while you may miss out on their first steps or their first words, what you're not missing out on is the first time, you know, they say "I love you," or the first time they fall over and hurt themselves and seek you out to come and get comfort, or the first Christmas that you share together, or the first time they meet their new grandparents. All of those things were just such magical experiences for us that, you know, we may have missed some firsts, but we've got so many others that we didn't miss out on, and we continue to have them. You know, the first time you go on an abroad holiday with them, the first time we took them on a plane, and they'd never been on a plane before, they were so excited. You know, that was just such a different experience for them, going to a different country where they speak a different language. You know, being able to give a few of those experiences, and equally the mundane stuff. You know, just when you're sat down and one of them really laughs at something that you've said, you know, that you get that real belly laugh. You know that you've, you know, made a strong connection. So yeah, I think so many of those memories just add up to being, the whole experience was so rewarding and so fulfilling, that it's really hard to just pick out a few. There have been so many, and there continue to be so many.
Great, thank you. So overall, I guess, what would you say to anyone who's considering adoption, and what advice would you give?
So I think most of all, go for it. You know, if you've done your reading, you've done your research, and you are prepared for the questions that you're going to get asked, the time that you need to put into it, and the thoroughness of the process. If all of that is something that you're comfortable with, then, you know, there should be nothing that holds you back. Adoption has been an absolutely amazing experience for us. We now have an amazing family that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Our boys have got, you know, a comfortable and safe home. They've got an extended family who just treat them as if they've always been here from day one. They are so loved. To be able to be in a position to give that experience to the boys is like nothing else, really. And people always say to us, and lots of other adopted people as well, oh, you know, your boys are so lucky that you adopted them. And we correct them every time and say, it's us who are the lucky ones, because they've brought so much to our lives that we wouldn't have otherwise had. It's not about feeling gratified that we've given them a different life. It's about the different life that they've brought to us. And I always say to people, you know, you don't have to be special to adopt, but being adopted to those children is so special. And, you know, if you're in a position to do it, go for it. You won't regret it.
Oh, I want to cry. Oh, it's lovely. So bringing us back down to earth again, do you mind if we just take a couple of steps back? Do you mind talking through your experience of panel?
So our experience of panel, in all honesty, some of the actual details of going into panel are a bit of a blur now, because it was such like a adrenaline-filled kind of event, because you are obviously pretty nervous. And going into a room with a bunch of people that you don't know, obviously, you know, your social worker and a few people, but essentially a room of strangers, to be presented as these people would like to adopt. Do you all approve? You know, it's quite a nerve-wracking thing. But the overwhelming feeling that I remember having inside that room was just the sheer encouragement and goodwill that every single member of that panel had towards us. You know, they wanted us to be there. They wanted to ask us a few questions, just to kind of get our views. But they were there because they wanted to find good people to adopt. They weren't there to scare people off or be really, really kind of strict in that way, which is almost what I think we were prepared for going into it. So yeah, it was a really friendly, welcoming atmosphere. We had a great chat. I think when we came out, my social worker said that apparently I chatted loads, and just wouldn't stop apparently. So yeah, I don't remember doing that, but and then we had like a short wait until the chair of panel came out and said, "You're approved," and that was just amazing. I guess, looking back now, it was kind of a foregone conclusion, because I don't think our social worker would have put us up for panel had she not felt that we were ready. But I guess we could have said something silly in that panel that might have just given pause for thought. But you definitely feel like that's quite a momentous step to get past. But it is nowhere near as scary in reality as we'd kind of built it up in our heads to be. And yeah, I guess they asked us some questions about our parenting style, how we would deal with certain circumstances, how we would deal with, being a same-sex couple when we go to school. I do remember them asking about how we would talk to our children about that whole element of being a same-sex couple. But yeah, it was just again another opportunity to share our kind of passion for adoption. And yeah, thankfully they said yes.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, Matt, Bex, is there anything else you want to ask? Matt, is there anything you really want to add in?
No, I think you've covered all the bases there.
I had one really quick question, Matt, if we can rewind back to when you were talking about like getting voluntary experience. Just kind of in terms of getting it, because obviously you both had, some experience, but then you went out of your way to, work with younger children. How, obviously every school is different or workplace is different, but how did you find approaching the school that you asked? Like, were they quite open to having you guys volunteer? What was that kind of like?
Yeah, so how did we find our voluntary placement? The school, it wasn't actually in the village where we lived. It was one a little further away. Sam actually, through his work, had a previous existing relationship with the head teacher of that school. So I think it was obviously slightly easier for us in that they were very amenable to us coming in. Obviously, we got DBS check. Sam already had one, mine had expired. So once all the paperwork was through, they were happy to have us in. We weren't going to be doing one-to-one work with any of the children or anything like that. I mean, it was all group work with teachers around, etc. But I got the impression, and I get the impression from our children's current school, that they love having parents volunteer to help. Obviously, we weren't parents of the school at the time, but they understood where we were coming from. We explained that we were looking to adopt and we were building up our experience, and they were really grateful for the input and the support and the time. And yeah, I think if you ask most voluntary groups that work with children, once the paperwork's in place, they will bite your hand off to get you in. I know that Cubs, and Scouts, Girl Guides, all those kind of organizations are always desperate for volunteers. Even just going into read, I guess, in primary schools, they always need parent helpers for that. Our boys' school has got a forest area. They love it if parents are willing to help take them out and just do some foresty stuff. So yeah, I think don't be afraid of approaching a school. Schools love the offer of help, especially when they're not paying for it because their budgets are already so stretched. So if you've got some skills or even just some time that you're willing to give up, I'm sure that they would be more than willing to take you up on it.
Oh, Matt, thank you so much. Your passion for adoption just absolutely shines through, and your love for the boys is so clear. Yeah, I mean, I have seen pictures of you guys, and you just all look such a close team. It's lovely.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased for you all. It's really lovely.
Thank you very much.